thing is that also that Lyme disease is a bit of a chameleon. I mean, it can present as a number of other types of illnesses. Lou Gehrig's disease, for example.
Right. In fact, this is another similarity to syphilis. Syphilis was called the great imitator because it had so many non-specific symptoms associated with it. And Lyme disease is called the new great imitator because, as you said, not only causes arthritis, it causes the neurological issues like ALS, MS. It also causes chronic fatigue syndrome and depression, etc. Now, this is very important because the pharmaceutical companies who are basically at the top of this conspiracy to leave Lyme patients untreated, these are all billion-dollar markets each. If you think about the depression, or the market for depression is $1 billion at least. Market for arthritis is at least $1 billion. Now you've got the new markets for chronic fatigue syndrome, etc. So you've got billions of dollars in symptom treatments in perpetuity, basically for the lifetime of the individual, if they can't clear the infection. Versus, the controversy is how to knock the infection out. If you can knock the infection out, then you're throwing away billions and billions of dollars in profit for the pharmaceutical industry. So they don't have an interest in knocking out the infection early because they're not going to make money off of it.
And if you get to it early, it is pretty easy to knock out, right? It's just, what, a round of antibiotics?
It can be. If it's treated really early and very aggressively with the right antibiotics, you can cure it in some cases, and in a lot of cases just knock it down to the point where it doesn't devastate you. But I would say most of the people do require so-called long-term antibiotics. Now, by long-term, talking something more than 2 to 4 weeks is what the Lyme experts will tell you is long-term, and you shouldn't need anything past that. But many, many, many people get better and better over the long term with antibiotics, and I'm one of them. I was on antibiotics administered by a world-class expert for about 4 years, and I just kept getting better and better until my doctor was put out of business, and then I had major relapses, had to find antibiotics over the internet.
What do you mean put out of business?
Well, if you look at why Lyme patients aren't getting treated, it's because the doctors that figure out how to treat it are systematically put out of business through the state medical boards. And that happened to my doctor as he was treating me. This is happening all over the country, and especially up in Connecticut, where the infection is off the charts. There was an article that came out that said only 2% of the doctors in Connecticut, this is at ground zero for the Lyme epidemic, are willing to treat or able to treat Lyme disease, which is a disaster.
In other words, if the state medical board, or up here the College of Physicians and Surgeons, catches wind that a doctor is treating Lyme disease with antibiotics, they'll pull their license?
Well, they'll let a doctor treat patients for several weeks with antibiotics, and then after that, they will definitely come after you if you're on their list. And this happens all the time. Typically, the cutoff is about 4 weeks or so.
Claiming that would be injurious to a patient as such a prolonged period of dosage.
Well, antibiotics can be dangerous. I mean, any drug is dangerous, but the question is the disease left untreated worse or more dangerous than the antibiotics? And you don't want to just do this casually. I was treated for 4 years, like I said, by an expert, and I got better and better. But I tend to be the exception to the case. I responded very well to antibiotics with very few side effects, but other people aren't so lucky. Again, it depends on your genetic makeup, your health, etc., and how far the disease progressed before you were treated. There's a lot of variables involved. But some people don't get any better after, if the disease goes untreated for years or decades, then antibiotics are going to be probably diminishing returns.
All right, Jerry, we'll take a time out. We'll come back and discuss the connection between Lyme disease and the outbreak which occurred in Connecticut and the Level 4 Bioweapons Lab located just offshore on Plum Island, and whether this vector-borne disease is in fact a bioweapons agent. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show. We'll also open up the lines and take your calls at 416-360-0740 and toll-free from out of town, 866-740-4740.
Poking holes in the darkness. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serra from Zoomer Radio. light. Call Richard now at 416-360-0740 or toll free in Ontario at 1-866-740-4740. This conspiracy theory of yours, if your friends are right and it's all just in your head, what's it doing in here? In your non-fiction source for all suppressed and conspiratorial information, conspiracyculture.com. Books, magazines, DVD, and audio. The truth isn't hard to find. Conspiracy Culture, Queen Street, West Toronto, east of Roncesvalles. Visit the bookstore for free thinking Canadians. Vision TV lets you in on every plot.
Deposit that's the first one. Now, Jesus to Olga Salanueva, Renee's wife, prevented from seeing her since August 2000. Renee's attorney filed out as the as Harwood put it during a press conference held last week. It is argued that an additional 3 years of punishment. On the one hand, that linguistic
This legal preach.
Small rodents, birds, pets, and people. And research has shown that the bacteria can be transmitted through the placenta. There's even concern that it may be transmitted through blood transfusions. In the U.S. and Europe, where much of the research is being conducted, researchers consider Lyme a larger pandemic than cancer and AIDS, with estimates up to 200,000 new cases a year in the United States alone. And here in Canada, new cases of Lyme are found in every province. So it's being underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed, and there are restrictions on treatment because we have Health Canada and U.S. guidelines. Doctors are restricted from using the long-term antibiotics they used previously, which seem to be very beneficial for many people with chronic Lyme. But, I mean, is it political? Well, I mean, what's behind this? Why is it being underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed? Is it because it's such a tricky disease, or is there some politics at play here?
Well, it's both. I mean, medical doctors nowadays, their practices are largely run by insurance companies. They don't have time to spend with a patient going over their health history for 2 or 3 hours in the first visit trying to diagnose this incredibly complex disease. So it's just doesn't fit the current medical paradigm, whereas the Lyme literate doctors will often spend a couple hours, like my doctor did with me, on the first visit. So this is a very time-intensive disease to understand, and it's a very frustrating one to treat because it requires very sophisticated antibiotic regimens over the long term, like I said, and the doctor's practice is literally going to be on the line if they go over the prescribed limit by these so-called voluntary treatment guidelines. I presented a talk at the Physicians Roundtable, which is a medical conference, about 6 months or so ago, where I went over how these so-called treatment guidelines are subverting modern medicine. A lot of people don't understand that they've got treatment guidelines for pretty much every disease under the sun. And with respect to Lyme disease, these were drafted as so-called voluntary guidelines and reinforced by the CDC. But the doctors who try to treat beyond the recommended antibiotics duration, like I said, find themselves up on charges, and they can be destroyed and put out of business. So those guidelines are in fact not voluntary. But if you look at the people who write the guidelines, you have a curious confluence of several major power centers. For example, the pharmaceutical industry and the insurance industry. Now, the insurance companies make money by not paying out health benefits, so it's not in their interest to pay, $100,000 per patient for long-term intravenous antibiotics. And the pharmaceuticals company make billions of dollars off any one of half a dozen different symptoms that plague Lyme disease sufferers. So these so-called treatment guideline authors are overly represented by pharmaceuticals and insurance company consultants. Now they also have another overriding theme, which is they're overly represented by the biowarfare community. For example, Alan Steer, who was put in charge of the investigation into what was causing this outbreak of rheumatoid arthritis in Murraystown, was a recent graduate of the CDC's Biodefense Unit that a lot of people don't even know exists, of the Epidemic Intelligence Service, or the EIS for short. And if you look closely at the Lyme disease outbreak, you find an EIS agent at every critical juncture. In fact, there's a very good essay written by Elena Cook called Lyme Disease is a Biowarfare Issue. I recommend that your listeners Google that. It's a very good overview of how the Epidemic Intelligence Service is controlling this non-response to the Lyme disease epidemic. Also, the lead author of the treatment guidelines, which were republished several years ago, is Gary Wormser, and he also lectures on biowarfare agents in his spare time. You can see his lectures on the internet.
In his spare time. It's a hobby, apparently. All right, let's grab some calls before we get into Plum Island. Tara is in Markham, Ontario. Good morning, Tara. You're on The Conspiracy Show. Hello, Tara.
Can you hear me?
There she is. All right, you're on the line with Jerry Leonard. Go ahead.
Hi. It's been my understanding and my reading that spirochete is a single-celled parasite, not a bacteria. And if it is indeed a single-celled parasite, then the Hogacarp zapper and certain other parasite cleanses could probably eradicate this from the body very easily. Has that not been tried, or have you not looked at this, or do you know anything about this?
First of all, the spirochete is a bacterium, and unfortunately...
As I said, my reading, I've studied this. It is designated as a single-celled parasite.
Well, none of the literature that I've seen, Tara, would agree with that. But I mean, maybe perhaps you've seen something that we haven't, Jerry.
Well, I mean, if it were that easy to get rid of, people would have come up with treatments for syphilis long ago, and we still don't have effective treatments for tertiary syphilis. So the problem with Lyme disease is, as I said, it burrows. It's a corkscrew-shaped organism, and it burrows into various organs. It goes over the blood-brain barrier, and it's also intracellular. So it's extremely pervasive, and it goes into places where antibiotics are very hard to reach because the blood flow is low or because of the blood-brain barrier, and you need specialized antibiotics to be administered to address those issues. For example, some antibiotics cannot act intracellularly. Some antibiotics cannot overcome the blood-brain barrier, etc. So these Borrelia spirochetes are renowned for causing relapsing diseases. There's a Borrelia that causes relapsing fever, which was studied in the 60s and 70s, and turns out it causes this relapsing phenomenon to occur. You treat it with antibiotics, and it comes back a month later. You can't get rid of it. Now, you mentioned alternative treatments. There are various alternative treatments that people are looking into because their doctors are systematically being put out of business. And some of them work, some of them don't. Depends on who you talk to.
All right, let's say hello to Dan in Hamilton. Good morning, Dan.
Yeah, my question is where I am, is these ticks that, you see go on animals and stuff,